In this video, we're going to be weaving with scrap yarn. So let's get started. All right, it's probably no news if you've been around here for a while that I have a lot of scrap yarn and I keep them in these bins and I have them kind of color coded. I also have one that has black and browns and grays. That one is the least full. And then the most full one I have is with all of my off-white yarn. Now, I was really hoping to come into this video with a clear idea of what I want this piece to look like, but I am not. Sometimes I find it difficult with abstract pieces to have a clear picture of what I want them to look like. Maybe it's because the idea itself is almost more abstract in my mind. I don't know, I'm probably thinking about it a little bit too much, but I don't know. So I'm gonna sit here in my brain for a little bit, and then we're gonna go ahead and get started with an actual piece. I'm gonna show you a scrap weaving that I have done previously. I really like this one. I think it's really fun, and it's just colorful with lots of white in between everything to sort of give it, I don't know what even to call it, just to give it some lift, I guess was the idea that I had. So I obviously don't want to weave the exact same thing again. So I'm trying to think of a different strategy that perhaps just doesn't include white. Obviously there's a lot of different strategies I can go about this with. I could stick to, let's say, one bucket of yarn. This one has all the blues and greens in it, and I actually think that could be really pretty to do basically a more analogous color palette where all the colors kind of sit next to each other on the color wheel. So I could stick to this one bucket of yarn and do that, and I think that could look really good, but I'm also like, am I gonna love it? Now, I could also go for this bucket, which has a little bit more color variation than this one, or I can just go random. And I think that's the part that I'm currently struggling with. Honestly, one that's all just shades of pink could also be really fun. I think I'm gonna go ahead and just put a warp on, and we're just gonna start and see where this takes us. We're going to start this in the same way that I do in this video here, which is called How I Start Every Weaving. I am warping on 32 total warp strings with 8/8 cotton. This is the thickest of the warp strings that I typically use, and I'm just doing a single warp, which means there's just one string in each notch. My loom is a 4 ends per inch loom, and you can find this exact loom on my website at spruceandlinen.com. And if you didn't know, I do make them myself here in Canada. I'm gonna be weaving on the flat. That is my preferred method, both for filming and just because my shoulders get too sore if my arms are up all the time. So I just like weaving on the flat whenever possible. But if you do want to check out our loom, it does come with legs so that you can prop it up on an angle like this if that's what you prefer. After warping the loom, I wove in a piece of cardstock. Mine is just over 3 inches tall and it's folded over. This gives me something firm and straight to beat the weft down onto. And then I took a super bulky weight yarn. This one is Lion Brand Woolies Thick and Quick, and I did my twining stitch followed by 2 rows of plain weave. All right, so we have the base of our weaving done. The next thing I need to do is the fringe. Now, I did sort of contemplate if I should use scraps for the fringe, but I kind of want to do the same type of fringe that I have been doing like exclusively, well, almost exclusively for the last while, which is a combination of 5mm and 2mm recycled cotton string. I really like how it looks, and I think what I love most about cotton string versus what I used to do years ago was actually use this same yarn I used for the base as my fringe. But what I didn't like about that is that you do have to steam it out to get it straight, and that the cotton string just kind of hangs nicely all on its own. And I do like the texture of it better as well. It feels a bit more natural and slightly less uniform, especially using 2 different sizes, than this yarn does. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that, figure out the length that I wanna go with, and then we'll get started with the actual weaving with scraps part. For each grouping of the fringe, I'm going to be using 1 piece of the 5mm and 2 pieces of the 2mm. This just gives me a thickness that I'm happy with for this 4 ends per inch loom. It fills out each section nicely, but doesn't make it too thick. All right, so I have all the base work done. So now I need to start actually weaving. Now, I mostly want to use, similar to that piece I showed you earlier, I want to use raya knots, which is the same thing as this, but with shorter pieces to create the piece itself. But what that means when we do a lot of raya knots like that, I like to use some plain weave in between the rows, because otherwise, especially if we kept these lined up, this whole part of the weaving is just going to be separated like this. So I want to make sure that doesn't happen. So I will be doing plain weave, and I'll try to use scraps for the most part to do that. But there's kind of a couple strategies I could go with in terms of how I want to do this. The first would be to weave every single row as a full row and then do plain weave over top of that. Even if I'm making organic shapes, I would still have a row of the raya knots, do a row of plain weave. That might be the most organized way of doing it, but the other option would be to work in sections. So let's say I want to have a blue section first, where I'm making a little organic blue shape here, and I just want to sort of do a row, do some plain weave over top of that, do another row, and do each of my shapes at the same time. Either way is totally fine, but it's a matter of how I feel like my brain will operate. Because typically when I do the more organic shape weavings, I work on one entire section at a time. So again, if I did a blue section, I would weave the blue, then I would weave a section of yellow and then a section of red, and I would do it that way. So I just need to decide which one both makes the most sense to me and, well, I guess basically just what my preference is. It doesn't even matter if it makes sense. It's more of just what the preference of the way that you weave is. I just thought of something else that might be kind of cool to try, and that would be to actually, instead of doing organic shapes, what if I wove more like squares of color? So it was like little boxes, almost like a checkerboard, but with, it's like kind of combining a very geometric shape with a very organic texture, and that might be kind of cool. Ideas are forming. So I'm going to mark where I want my weaving to end. I know what size of dowel I'm going to use, which is a 7/8 inch dowel, and I know on this loom that means I need about 3¼ inches from the top to wrap it around the dowel the way that I like to do. So I'm going to have this little string here just as a reminder of where I need to stop. So what does that leave me with? We have about 7 inches and our piece is about 7½ currently. All right, I think I need to just start. So we're going to just get started. Now, the nice thing about doing a scraps weaving, how I'm going to be doing this, is you only need to know 2 stitches, and that is a raya knot and plain weave. So in that video, how I start every weaving, which is how I set up this loom, both of those stitches are included. I will show you them here as well, but they're 2 very basic stitches, and that's going to make it really nice because you don't need to know endless stitches for this kind of piece. So now I need to just start with what color I want and maybe decide on a length that I want, because if I keep everything a similar length, I think that will make my life a little bit easier. So to start, I think I'm going to make these about 4 inches long each and see how that goes. I might want to do it a bit longer, and then if I want to trim it down later, I could. This is the part that gets tricky because, just so you can see here, I have so many different kinds of yarn, so I kind of need to decide how I want to utilize those, and the thickness of the combination of the yarns I use kind of needs to be the same for everything. So let's just start with pink because it's what's in front of me. I'm gonna go with 5 inches, and I'm just gonna randomly grab a few different pinks, kind of in the same family, I guess. Okay, let's see where these get us. Now, another thing I could do within using scraps is to try to repeat the same combination of yarns for each section. That might make it look a little bit tidier. Now, that's a personal preference if you want it to look tidy versus not, but I don't hate the idea of it looking tidy. I feel like my brain might enjoy that. The other thing I could do, which kind of might sound more enjoyable, is I could do stripes. I could do pinks across the whole way and then do another color, and I could do that as well. In other words, there's too many options. I'm just kind of cutting a bunch of stuff to be the same length, so maybe that will also make it feel like a smoother process if I have several different yarns already picked out and cut to length. So I'm not trying to dig through here for every single bundle. I am a person who does enjoy some amount of efficiency because I feel like it makes me feel less overwhelmed. Let's just see what we can come up with here. Not every bundle has to be the same. Should I have even done a fringe on this? Should this be a fringeless piece? Because now I'm feeling like maybe that would look better to not have this additional fringe and just have the whole thing be the kind of shagginess. Should we try it? Because already I'm not loving how these are sticking out because I'm like, it doesn't really go with this. And this is kind of acting like a fringe, so I'm tempted to take them out, you guys. Is that a bad idea? Let's just take out these first 3 and see how I feel. I will absolutely just be saving this fringe since I use this combination so much. I'll just save it and use it on another piece, and then it's already pre-cut for a different piece. So let's see what that looks like as the bottom. I kind of like that. I think I'm just gonna go for it. We're gonna do something a little bit different. I know some people like a more fringeless piece anyway, so why don't we try it? Now that I've got my bearings a little bit, I will show you a raya knot. So you're gonna have your little grouping of yarns like so, and you're gonna work with 2 strings at a time. So first I'm gonna work on the right one, and I'm grabbing the right part of this and wrapping it from right to left around the right string. Then I'm gonna kind of hold it onto it with my right hand, lift up the left string. Now I'm going to be wrapping this group of yarn on the left from left to right around the left string. And then you sort of can just line up the ends and pull the whole bundle down. And then that's how you create a raya knot. And that's the stitch I'm going to be using throughout this whole piece. So I'll be using my raya knots, and then I'll do plain weave in between to make sure that everything's nicely locked into place so that it doesn't create a disconnected weaving. So I've kind of fallen into a slight pattern, which I'm not mad about, except for on this one, I guess. But I started kind of using one bundle will have this yarn, and then the next one will have this one, and then I'll have this one again. I don't have to keep doing that, but it's just sort of a inevitable thing that seems to happen is I want to fall into some sort of pattern when I'm doing pieces. And that's the one that has happened. Okay, so I have woven up a row of pink, and I think it's really fun. It's very thick. So now I need to decide how many rows of plain weave to do in between each of the rows of the Raya knots, because obviously the closer that the Raya knots are to each other, the more it's gonna start sticking up like this. So I'm thinking I might even go for up to like 3 rows of plain weave. That will both lock everything in really nicely, and then it should also leave enough space that it's just not getting quite as bulky, question mark. That's my theory. I might have to use for my larger ball for the plain weave just for some ease. So let's just measure out 1, 2, 3. I thought I had longer pieces in my scraps, but I don't. So let's just weave this in 3 rows. So now we're just doing plain weave, which is just over 1, under 1. And I'm going to do that all the way across the loom. Then what I want to do is sort of create an arch. You can strum the warp, use your weaving comb to beat down that warp. Now I left a pretty short tail. I'm going to pull that a little bit more and then beat this down again. And then I'm going to go back the other way. So now I'm going over, under from the other side. Since I ended going under this warp string, I'm just going to do an extra wrap so that that end is going to be just easier to tuck in later, and it finishes off this edge nicely. You can see now that it's all nicely connected. It's not being separated with those Raya knots. After I decided on stripes all within the same color family, I really just got into the zone, and this took so much longer than I was expecting it to. I feel like I say that so much with these projects, and I guess it makes sense because a lot of them are ones that I have never done before, so they just take longer than you would think that they would. Now, I will say very honestly that I did have to get some non-scrap yarn for a few of the sections. There were some colors I didn't have a lot of scraps of, so I did end up bringing in some balls of yarn and using those, but I was very careful to cut each piece at the length I needed it, so I wasn't at least creating more scraps by taking from the full ball of the yarn. The orange section was especially hard because I apparently don't work with orange that much. So I needed to bring in a few new yarns for that section, which is totally fine, but I wanted to give you that full disclosure just in case you are attempting a project like this and you feel like you just can't quite make it work. I think it's totally fine to bring in some other yarns to complete the piece in a way that you think is gonna end up really nice at the end. All right, so I'm done the weaving part, but what I'm noticing, because these pieces of yarn are both scraps coming from bigger scrap bins, as well as cutting all these pieces to be quite short, there is a lot of fuzziness going on, which I don't know if you can even see on camera, but there's just a lot of extra fluff. So I kind of want to attempt to vacuum some of it off. Now, I did bring my trusty colander, or I don't know, I call it a colander. It's kind of a handheld one, I guess. But if you haven't seen our how to clean a woven wall hanging video, I will link it right here. And basically the best way to do it that I've concluded when you just have some extra dust and fluff to pick up is you kind of push something like a colander or maybe even a piece of screen and then vacuum that way so that you're not like vacuuming up wool or anything. However, because all of these are actually yarn and they're not wool roving, I'm kind of wanting to see if I can just vacuum directly on it to pick up the fuzz, because I think that might be more effective. So I'm gonna try that and we'll see how it goes. Okay, I honestly don't know that that did a whole lot. I think the nature of this piece is just that it's gonna be a little bit fluffy. Now, what I could do is I could at least go along some of the bottoms, along the bottom of each section and just trim off any excess fluff that's sticking out. Now, again, I think a scrap piece has a scrappy nature to it, and I think that's totally fine. It's just the way it goes, especially with some of this yarn that is more like a bit like a pencil roving. It's slightly spun, but it's ultimately still quite fluffy as well. So to me, I think I can just clean it up a little bit so that any like big obvious fluffs are kind of taken care of, so it looks a little bit cleaner. But in the end, it is just going to be naturally more scrappy. I'm also evening out the bottom here a little bit because these pieces aren't all quite the same length. And again, scrappy piece, it's not going to all be uniform, but I just like to go back and make things, well, no matter what the piece, I do like to go back and try to make it look somewhat even or kind of evenly uneven, if that makes sense. But you can see here, I just have like a little pile of fluff and I'm just, yeah, just cleaning it up a little bit. So what I am gonna do before I flip this over, it's gonna be very fluffy underneath my loom. So I am gonna go ahead and vacuum that up so that when I flip my loom over and rest it on the front, it's not getting more fuzzy. All right, so the next thing I need to do is flip this over, and also the back is kind of cool. That's kind of fun. Back is its own little piece of art here. So I'm going to grab all the ends from the back, or from the front rather, and bring them to the back so I can tuck them in. And then I'll be grabbing just a simple yarn needle and tucking in the ends. So I will show you one, and then the rest are going to be exactly the same. So I'm threading that end through my little yarn needle here, and I'm just going to take this up through the loops in the back, like so. I'm gonna pull that through without pulling it super, super tight, and then just trim off the excess. All right, so I have all those ends tucked in the back, and so now I'm ready to take this piece off of the loom. So I'm gonna go ahead and take out the cardstock and then start knotting the bottom warp strings using overhand knots. Now I'm taking the weaving off of the loom, and because this bottom row of pink is so thick, I'm not going to bother tucking these back in because they're definitely not going to show from the front anyway. So I'm gonna go ahead and leave about a ½ inch or so below my knots and just trim off the excess of the warp strings. And while I'm doing this, I'm being careful not to cut any of the yarns that are on the actual weaving. I'm just cutting these warp strings. I just realized I didn't mention this at all, but I didn't do a twining stitch or anything at the top of this piece because I didn't want to ruin the effect, but here's hoping it actually works because I just removed that from the loom without even thinking, and now I'm like, well, hopefully this doesn't look terrible once it's on the dowel. I think it'll be okay. So basically what I'm doing is I'm taking 2 loops of my warp strings, I'm opening them up, flipping them forward, and then bringing them back to the middle to create this loop, and then slipping that on the dowel. So I'm just gonna do that same process all the way across the piece. That was a risky move though. I thought about it earlier, you know, about adding a twining stitch at the top of the piece, and then I decided that that wasn't gonna look good, but I didn't really slow down to consider the structure just now when I just went taking it off the loom, but it seems to be working so far. So that's good news. So now I'm just kind of, I can even use my weaving comb. I'm just trying to comb everything so it's sitting a little bit straighter. But I love the nature of this somewhat chaotic piece. The very last step is to add a hanging string, and I'm using the same string I used for the warp to do this. It's all done, so let's have a look at the finished piece. All right, let me know what you think in the comments down below, and if you enjoyed this video, check out this one next.